and welcome to the Olive Branch Community Church. It is so good to have you here today. My name is Kathy, and if you're joining us for the very first time, we warmly welcome you. It is my hope and prayer that you hear of something that is of great encouragement to you and of great value that will help you in your daily life. Today, we are in part 3 of our message series entitled VOWS, and Pastor Ken is going to be sharing on the specific topic of marriage. And whether you're married or not, I'm sure you'll hear something that is going to help you, because it is talking about doing what we will say we'll do in the context of a relationship. So we all have relationships, so I am sure that you'll hear something that will benefit you and make your relationships richer. So before we go on to the word, let's spend some time worshiping the ultimate promise keeper, God, who always does what he says he'll do.
I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned unclean. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned unclean, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. He took my sin and my sorrows and made them his very own, and bore the burden to Calvary, and suffered and died alone. We're singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. My Savior's love. When with the ransomed in glory, his face I at last will see, will be my joy through the ages, to sing of his love for me. We're singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me.
We are in this series of talks about vows, which sounds very formal and, in description of promises and so on. But we're actually talking about making and keeping promises and not having some sort of false differentiation between, the really small promises and the really big ones. So this is an important topic, I think, in a world where we get a lot of lies, a lot of stuff that comes our way. Everybody wants to be seen as a trustworthy person. And yet, to be trustworthy, you have to be worthy of someone's trust. And they kind of weigh what you say and what you actually do in the balances. The promises that we make are based on God's promises and on God's character, okay? So on character integrity, we say, I want you to trust me, but for people to actually trust you, that you have to be trustworthy. And what they have to look at is whether or not you have a history of keeping your promises. So there's all these factors in there to get what you want, which is to be seen as a person who's trustworthy. And again, people say, well, just a promise, it's not really a vow. Well, sometimes we tend to, kind of define our promises based on whether or not we're going to keep them, which is exactly what Jesus was trying to deal with. We got a platinum promise and gold promise and silver promise and bronze promise, and they keep getting smaller and smaller. And the point is to keep our promises. Jesus' instruction on this, he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Just do that and you should be fine. So that's kind of where we're going with this. Now today, I want to talk about marriage vows. And of course, starts out with my little exercise person here. Love is an action verb, and that's kind of where we're going with the talk today. Now, there's some promises in life, like vows that we make that are costly to keep, okay? It's difficult to do it. If you've gotten yourself into a whole pile of consumer debt and so on, what you've done, debt means I'm going to pay this off someday, but, it gets really difficult. Now, you can cut back on what you spend, and you can kind of make some lifestyle adjustments, and you can, pay this off a little bit of time. You can do it. You actually can do it. There's some pain involved, but you can do it. If you've gotten way out of shape, okay, so you're one jelly donut away from the Grim Reaper, you can lose weight. You can get back in shape. You can exercise. It's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. It's going to take some self-control. But you can do it. You can do it. You may have dropped out of school, and you feel stuck in a job, and you don't have the education that you wish that you had. Now, you can actually go back to school. You can. It'll take some money. You may have to give up some of your, extracurricular activities and, watch a little less TV, but you can actually go back and get your degree, and you'll feel better about yourself. But setting these goals and keeping these promises is dwarfed by another promise that we make in life. Many of us make, and that's basically the promises that we make when we marry somebody. Your marriage vows are the biggest and the best and the costliest promises that you will ever make. And they are also the biggest, the best, and the costliest vows that you will ever break. That's just the way it is. And if you don't realize this, talk to somebody who has. Now, our culture's answer to this whole situation is, well, just don't make vows. Just get together and and do that. It's easy peasy. Well, actually, that's not true. Because when you make promises with your time, and when you make promises with your finances and your resources and your heart and your soul and all of these things, whether or not you actually have signed on the dotted line in terms of the pain quotient is really small. I mean, you can, get in an accident with your car and get killed, and it really doesn't make any difference whether or not you own your car, in terms of the pain that you feel. Now, here's what I really want to do this morning, okay? So just follow me in this. If you have had a marriage failure, like if you've had your vows go off from underneath you and you've had your heart broken, you need to know, first of all, that God cares. God cares. And He's not waving His finger at you and shaming you for being a bad person. He's a divorcee. He had to divorce, a nation that was unfaithful to Him. So He's a divorcee. He understands this. So please understand what I'm saying in that context. And you need to know if the needle on, your love tank is bouncing around the empty mark, like it looks like things are in trouble, you need to know that you can turn that around. You really can. It takes both of you, but you can turn it around. If you're thinking about getting married, one of the things you want to do is, do the due diligence, like check it out, like make sure you really know this person as well as you think that you do. If you've been married for a while and you've experienced some pain, and the wounds are still a little bit fresh, but you kind of broke through it, you need to thank God. Be grateful that God has helped you to make it through. You're a survivor. But if you're just cruising along in your marriage, and you're thinking, what? This is no big deal. We love each other. This is not a problem for us. Well, enjoy the time. Maybe you'll be the exception and you'll just live happily ever after and you'll never have any problems. I hope so. So I just want to tell you the perspective that I'm coming from today. A little bit of, I guess you could call it my credentials. I've been married for 44 years, okay? So I was raised in Arkansas, where you can get married at the age of 13, so it's all good. I'm not that old. I've been a pastor and I've been a coach for years, okay? I've done too many weddings to count, and I've read a lot about marriage and spoken on marriage, and I've done a lot of premarital counseling, done some postmarital counseling, and I've watched over the years as, just the carnage that our culture has created, just through divorce and remarriage and just all that stuff. I work with people a lot. Man, I've seen a lot of pain. Now, I want to start today by rereading the marriage promises that you made. If you were married by me, you probably made these promises before God and before the people that are there. Okay, this is what you said. Before the all-knowing God and in the presence of these witnesses, will you take this person to be your wedded spouse? Will you love and comfort them, honor and keep them, and in joy and sorrow preserve with them this holy bond, wedding bond, holy and unbroken, until the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, or God by death shall separate you? And you said, I will. Now, I know it's kind of a blur, okay, because you're in the emotion of the moment and you can barely remember that. And then you turned to each other, looked into each other's eyes, and you said something like this: I can take you, Lori, to be my wedded wife. I love you as I love no other. All that I am, I give to you. I share with you. I take you to be my wife through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow, through poverty and plenty, now and forever. That's what you said. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is that, first of all, this is not a contract. I will do this if you do that. You do this and I'll do that. It's not a contract. You are not promising to receive love, to just kind of be the passive recipient of somebody else's love and affection. And, while they do all the work, you're just going to sit back and just enjoy it all. No, love is an action verb. It's defined in the book of 1 Corinthians 13, which you may have had read at your wedding. And love says this: love is patient when it feels like being impatient. Love is kind when you just feel like being mean. Love doesn't keep a record of wrongs when you'd like to flog somebody with all the bad things they've done in the past. And, love continues on. Love believes the best. Love rejoices when truth wins out. Love never gives up and it never loses faith. Love wins. Love wins. Love never fails. You promised on that day that you got married that you would preserve this bond. Preserve basically means that you're going to make sure that it doesn't get contaminated, it doesn't get broken. Like, you're going to look after it, you're going to keep it before you. You're going to let it be, the barrier between you and all the other stuff that's out there. Now, here's my assessment of marriage vows. First, most people, when they get married, they're looking into each other's eyes and they're so distracted and so on. And they think they know each other better than they actually do. Okay, so that's kind of, so when you tell them about this at a wedding, they, yeah, we heard that. We're going to be just fine. We love each other more than other people do. So they think this is just going to come naturally because it many times comes so naturally in courtship. The second thing is that people think, that when things get rocky and they're fighting just about every day and the feelings seem to be leaking out of their marriage, that it's inevitable that they're going to separate and then they're going to divorce and then they're going to go shopping for somebody else, okay? And third, there are times when marriage feels lonely. Almost every marriage feels that way. And sometimes when it feels lonely, the gut reaction is, this is not the person that I fell in love with. And sometimes the companion thought to that is, I married the wrong person, and now I have to go out and find the right person, and then things will work out. And that's why Jesus said what he did about breaking marriage vows. He says, don't go off on that detour. He says, you've heard that the law says a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. But I say that a man who divorces his wife unless she has been unfaithful causes her to commit adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. Now, the broader context for this is found in Matthew chapter 19, and I'm going to read that passage. And it becomes clear what was going on. There was this divisiveness within the culture with, one group of people being on one side, one on the other. It says, some Pharisees came and tried to trap him, Jesus, with this question. Should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? Haven't you read the scriptures? Jesus replied. They record that from the beginning, God made them male and female. And then he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife. And the two are united into one. And since they are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. Then why did Moses say in the law that a man could give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away? They asked. Jesus replied. Notice his response here. Moses permitted divorce, but only as a concession to your hard hearts. But it was not what God originally intended. And I tell you this, whoever divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery unless his wife had been unfaithful. Now, just a couple things to help understand what's going on here. First of all, in that culture, only men could initiate a divorce. If you were a woman and you didn't like your husband or if something else was going on, you were kind of stuck with it, okay? And there were two very divergent views that were taken by the Pharisees back then. One of them was Rabbi Shammai, who said, no, if you're going to divorce, it has to be because of unfaithfulness. So Jesus obviously sides with him. The other side of this was a guy by the name of Rabbi Hillel, and he said, you can do it for just about any reason. She burns the toast, she argues, too much with you, and people next door hear it, or she doesn't discipline the children as you think that she should, and so on. You can just, pick a choice, pick a cause. So what was happening was, this guy, had been married maybe a few years, and so he sees this cute girl down the street from him, and he's thinking, I got to find something, and he would just basically, ditch his wife and say, you burned the toast this morning, or you're disagreeable to me, and then he'd go marry somebody else, okay? Give her a writ of divorce, and she'd be out. And she was out there, she didn't have any other means of supporting herself except to go back home, or maybe go into prostitution. So this was incredibly unjust to women in that culture. And Jesus says, no. He says, let's just call this what it is. This isn't an excuse for adultery. That's exactly what it is. So how did this come across? Well, listen to Jesus' disciples. Jesus' disciples then said to him, if this is the case, better not to marry. Not everyone can accept this statement, Jesus said. Only those whom God helps. Let anyone accept this who can. Now, without delving into, all the details and so on, there's this misconception, that marriage is kind of a contract where I get what I want for the rest of my life. You could kind of look at it like this, so I got the box. This is my marriage box, always and forever. And so this is kind of the box of goodies, and I'm going to dip into this for the rest of my life. This is my life from now on. What you need to understand is, from the perspective of the Bible, that's not what love is. Love is more like this. You go to Love University, and it's a tough education. You got to study, and you got to pass exams and so on. So your marriage is kind of where you learn to love. Love is kind of like a forge. Forges are hot places. I don't know if you've ever been by one, but they heat up the metal, and then you bam, 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 bam. It's where your love gets forged into your heart. And then, of course, love is also a crucible. It's where all the impurities kind of get burned out of your love thing. So this is what love is. Love is not just something that you get. Now, Jesus does say that sometimes when a person takes an exit ramp and they're unfaithful, it does so much damage to the trust within the relationship that it can't be rebuilt again. That happens, okay, in relationships. But Jesus is saying here, you vowed, you promised, you did your homework. And this is a place where you have to learn to love and you learn to keep your promises. And God will help you to do that. The intent, you see, is how to learn to love unconditionally. And to do that, you have to grow into it. It's not something that just magically happens, as you see every day how more and more wonderful the person is that you married. And if you learn this, if you take the time to learn this, this will be a powerful experience. You will build something in your life that you would never otherwise have. And it provides a safe context so that you have something, when you get older, so that you have a place where your children can be raised. Now, how many of you think that this would be, that should be sounds pretty easy. I think I can do this, This is no big deal. If you're really deeply, deeply, deeply in love, this should happen naturally. Well, there's a word for that, and it's called naive. Because love has to be forged. Let me just kind of share some of the differences, okay, that are here. Jesus said that from the beginning, God made them male and female. Now, there are a lot of differences between male and female. Back in 1993, you might be familiar with this, even though it's almost 20 years ago. John Gray, a psychologist, he wrote a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Now, this is an exaggeration, okay? But the point that he makes is very true. Men and women are very different. Let me give you an idea of how different, okay? William Hartley, another psychologist, he talks about, the 10 emotional priorities or the 10 emotional needs that men and women have. And I'm sorry this doesn't look very neat and so on, but anyways, that's the best I could do for now. So he talks about these needs, and men and women have the same needs, except they're in a very different order. Like if you would take the bottom 10 of the list, it would probably be the guy, and if it would be the top 10, it would be the woman. A guy's needs is for sexual fulfillment, having a companion, have a recreational companion, a wife that's attractive, having peace and quiet and respect. Her needs are very different. Affection, she needs affection. Talk to me. She wants a husband who's trustworthy. A guy who has a decent income. In other words, she doesn't want to feel like she has to support the family. He's a good dad. Now, these differ from couple to couple, but I'm telling you, the differences are real, okay? And you have to pay attention to that. Now, you see the problem. Jesus defined loving others as yourself, okay? So if a guy says, well, I'm going to love her as I love myself. So he would be thinking, well, she needs sexual fulfillment. She needs companionship. He would be thinking in terms of what he needs for emotional fulfillment. And meanwhile, she's thinking something totally different. And so a couple can be passing in the night like this, thinking that they're meeting each other's needs. Same thing, there are different love languages. So, you can be speaking a love language and saying to your husband every day, I love you, I love you, I love you. What he's hearing is, wah, 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 wah. He can't understand what you're saying. It's the wrong language. Same thing between husbands and wives. If you want to get even more complicated, families are different. I was raised with a different family than Lori was, and you were raised, if you're married, you were raised in a different family than your spouse. Now, you marry the family. Maybe you didn't think you wanted to, but you did, like it or not. And you marry somebody who has 20 or 30 or 40 years of experience with parents and siblings, and in this time, I can guarantee you, there is this job description based on what they've experienced in their family that they have for you. So a guy goes into a marriage with his job description for his wife. A wife goes into a marriage with his job description for her husband. Now, it's silent because these are just expectations. You never even thought about it that deeply. And what happens is you're going to get to a point where you're going to look at each other and say, well, I thought you were going to do that. Well, I thought you were going to do that. Don't husbands do that? Don't wives do that? And then there's the differences in how your families did things. Say, why would you do things wrong when you can do them the way my family did them, which is right? And it just gets very confusing. And by the way, and this is free, in the original instruction, if you notice this from marriage that Jesus gave, from the very beginning, from Genesis, it says that a man, leaves his mother and father and cleaves to his wife. The job description for kids is eventually to leave. The job description for a husband and wife is to cleave, to be glued together forever, okay? If that weren't enough, okay, we've got the issue. We live in a culture that's highly sexualized. It is hard to look anywhere without this being shoved down your throat, It's all over the place. Comes onto your computer whether or not you want it. Comes onto your iPhone whether or not you want it. We live in a world, basically it's a disposal world. If it's broken, you throw it away or you sell it on Kijiji. And some have applied this to marriage. And I'll tell you, with disastrous results. This is a tough time in history to keep and fulfill your marriage vows. But here's the deal. Just because it's hard to keep promises doesn't mean that you're off the hook. You promised. You need to keep the promises that you made because you made them. You knew what you were saying. You're accountable for them. And honestly, it is the best road to happiness. And if you think that, relief is spelled D-I-V-O-R-C-E, you're wrong. Talk to somebody who's been there because it's very painful. Now, as we land this plane, I want to read a passage that holds this amazing wisdom, okay? And this one has been misunderstood hugely, mainly because of a word that nobody likes and because of how this has sometimes been lived out by, klutzy men especially, okay? So, have some suggestions to go the distance and finish the race, and then we're done, okay? I promise. Now here's a word in the verses from Ephesians that everybody hates. It's not because it's a bad word. It's because of the fact that of the ugly ways that it's been misused. And I'm just going to put it up here so that you see what it is in all of its glory. It's the word that nobody likes, submit. Now here's what you need to understand. The passage in Ephesians that talks about this, it says that husbands and wives are to submit to each other. And if you doubt me, let me read it for you. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21. And further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, this isn't saying to, submit because this will make the way marriage easier, submit because this is the way, God wants everything to be. It's out of reverence for Christ who submitted himself to a cross, to humiliation, so that we could find life. That's our example. Okay? So, submit is not about getting your needs met. It's about doing what it takes to meet another person's needs. Let me just read the passage. Wives, understand and support your husbands in ways that show your support for Christ. The husband provides leadership to his wife the way Christ does to the church, not by domineering, but by cherishing. And so as the church submits to God, as he exercises such leadership, wives should likewise submit to their husbands. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church. A love marked by giving, not getting. Christ's love makes the church whole, and that is how husbands ought to love their wives. Now, before anybody reacts and wants to grab something and throw it at me and turn off the TV or whatever you're watching this on and so on, Jesus said that all leadership, if you're going to be a leader, by any stretch of the imagination, that involves servanthood, okay? And so it's not about, who holds the TV remote for the night or who makes supper or anything like that. It's what Jesus did when he stripped down out of his clothes and washed everybody's feet. And he told his disciples, this is what you need to do if you want to be a leader of any kind. To lead, you see, is not about having your own way and organizing things the way you want them organized and having the food that you want and so on. It's being the first one to do a dirty job. It's being the first one to say, I was wrong and I need to make things right. It's being the first one, to clean the basement. Somebody has to lead. Somebody has to humble themselves and serve. And whoever is willing to do it is the leader. I don't care what it is. Now, here's the deal, and what this is getting at, okay, because this needs to be understood in the context. For most guys want respect. That's how they spell love. And that's what this is talking about here. If you talk to, instead of Mel Gibson, you talk about what women want, they want to be loved and cherished by somebody who would willingly suffer and die for them and go to a cross if necessary. That's how it's defined, and that's how he defines it here. He tells us, if you want to love your spouse, this is what you need to do. Husbands, love your wives, just like Christ loved the church. And, what happens many times is couples kind of get into this mode, well, I'll respect you if you tell me you love me and cherish me, and the guy's saying, well, I'll tell you I love you, if you stop nagging me and stop bugging me and embarrassing me, and so on. So what happens is couples get into kind of this downward spiral, of neglect and disrespect. You nag me. Well, you don't say you love me. Well, you ignore me. Well, you put me down, and you don't talk to me. You never hug me. You don't. And I'll tell you, this is a downward spiral, and the only place is the bottom, where things crash and burn. And here's what I know, pride, grudge holding, record keeping, is the opposite of love. And having the courage to be the first to say, I'm so sorry, would you forgive me, is a huge deal in any marriage, because pride and resentment will kill a marriage. Now, I told you that I would, if you'd like some suggestions on how to go the distance, I'm going to give them to you right now, okay? These aren't original with me. I got them from Carrie Newhoff. I've reflected on them and changed some things and added some of my own because of my own experience, but they are authorized by me. So here we go, okay? I'm going to take you through this fairly quickly. First of all, love is a decision that you make, not an emotion that you feel. Now, everybody starts out really in love because we're on love drugs. I mean, this is a chemical fact, and it's not a bad thing at all. I mean, it's great. But you can't live on love drugs for the next 50 years. It's just not going to happen. And that's why we have to move to a definition of love like the one Paul gives. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not irritable and mean. It doesn't envy. It's not proud. It's not rude. You could define it like this. This is a difficult definition, but let me just say it. Love is an unconditional commitment to an imperfect, emphasize the word imperfect, person. You married an imperfect person. You probably already know that. And you're not maybe thrilled every working moment with who you married. Well, that's kind of standard. That's the way it goes. Number two, your emotions eventually catch up to your obedience. With Lori and I, if we were to be totally honest, there are probably times when, she has stayed with me simply as an act of obedience, not because I was such a wonderful person to be with, okay? That's just the way it is. Sometimes, this is the way it is in marriages, and unfortunately, we get into these moments and we start getting into this fight and we head into this downward spiral, okay? And what you need to do is start doing what is the right thing to do, and how you define love, and the feelings will follow. Third thing, don't make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. I've sometimes have talked to people who have, had suicidal thoughts, and my counsel is, you're making a permanent decision based on a temporary feeling. It doesn't feel temporary, but it is. And so, if you're in a marriage, don't make some kind of a permanent call on something based on a temporary thing that you may be going through. Emotion, when it's clouding your decisions, makes for poor decisions. You need to have a clear head. Live your story, not somebody else's. See, if you compare your marriage to somebody else or compare your spouse to somebody else's spouse, you need to understand, you don't see the full picture, first of all. In fact, you're likely to pick the best, aspects of each person that you know instead of being realistic about it. You can't compare your marriage to anybody else's. Live your story. Live your story. Number 5, and you know this, Instagram lies. It just does, okay? There's no one's marriage and no one's meals and no one's life that's as great as it gets portrayed on Instagram. It's somebody who's taking, maybe weeks of meals and putting the best one on there or whatever. So you just have to realize that. Don't pressure your spouse to be someone that only God can be. And I'll tell you the problem we live in. In our culture, worship has been kind of taken out of the equation because God has been pretty much in our culture removed from everyday life. And so what that means is somebody, marries sometimes a man or a woman, and they're expecting to fill that void within them and all the loneliness, that God-shaped vacuum creates. And they're expecting that this person is going to kind of be God, that they worship, or the kids are going to be like, I'll tell you, nobody can bear the weight of that kind of responsibility. Number 7, you probably married your opposite. I can't tell you how many times I've heard couples' versions of this, where they come in and, they're ready to get married. Oh, he's so strong and quiet and silent. I just sense strength about him all the time, And he says, she's so spontaneous and interesting. Like, she always has such interesting thoughts and interesting things to do. So you get them about 3 months in or 6 months in. He's like, yeah, he's a rock, all right. He's like a chunk of granite sitting on the couch, watching sports, And he says about her, she is ditzy. Like, she doesn't have a sane thought in her head. She's just unpredictable. I don't know what to expect. So you probably married your opposite, okay? Because opposites do attract. So it's important to understand that you knew that when you went in. Number 8, progress starts when you see that you're the problem, or you could be a key part of it. So just practice saying that, okay? I know it's very difficult. I'm not sure if you can get the words out. I am the problem. Just try and say that. I am the problem. And it helps you a lot in working things out if you assume that you are the problem, at least a big part of it. Number 9, your unspoken assumptions can sink your marriage. And again, I've already talked to this, but when you come into marriage, you come in, with this mental job description of what a good husband or a good wife is, And I'll tell you, if you apply that to a person, and you're like saying to them, well, you could do it right the way my family did it. It's just, you're not going to win that way. So you're going to approach things differently, and that's okay. Number 10, you need to have a common center line down your highway. You need to have common value system, because this has a way of tearing everything apart. Because you'll find hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of things to disagree with in your marriage. But if you agree on, what you believe about God, if you agree on who's accountable to whom and so on, that will really help you. I mean, for example, like when you're marrying somebody, you better know where they're going to go to when life gets really tough. Are they going to turn to God? Or are they going to get drunk? You better know that, okay? When you start having kids, you better understand, like how you feel about kids and what you do and how you raise them and so on. It's going to be very important. What are your priorities? How do you handle money? Lots of fights over that. Very important to find out, what you have in common. Number 11, remember that if you leave the marriage, you're going to drag all your unresolved problems from this marriage to the wrong person, to your new marriage, to the right person, who will then become eventually the wrong person. You have to resolve things, whether or not you can work it out in your marriage. You've seen this before. You are not going to be the exception to the rule. Number 12, and this may feel strange, but pray together. Pray together. You may feel awkward doing it, but I'm just saying, do it anyway, because what it reveals to both of you in a marriage is that there are some things in life that you have no control over. You may be both struggling with, one of your kids, and they're off on some weird tangent, and I'm telling you, you can't get to them, but God is the one who's able to get into their hearts, and it's important to talk to Him. Number 13, somebody needs to take the lead spiritually. And guys, I just want to challenge you to do this, not in the sense that we already talked about, where you become the person who holds the TV remote and, you get things that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the person who takes the leadership spiritually, who's the one who gets out of bed to go and worship, the one who initiates prayer, the one who basically, who once is going to be the one who is accountable and the person who is authentic and lives with integrity. You be that person. Number 14, do things together regularly as a husband and wife, And some people talk about this as a date night, and that's great. I would say whatever it is. Maybe it's a project that you do together. Maybe it's sharing a game. Maybe it's a hobby that you share, So this is really important in terms of just kind of the stuff that goes on in daily life. Guys especially need, a recreational companion. Number 15, don't make the kids the center of the family. Again, their job description is leave. Your job description is cleave. And I tell you, this can really create problems. They don't want to be the center, and you don't want them to be the center of the family. Number 16, take family vacations every year. See, these are the times that will create memories and will bond you together as a family. Very, very important. Number 17, figure out how to be a couple again before your kids grow up. I'll tell you what happens. Many times, especially in the middle years, you have your kids and so on, and then, when it comes to your career, you're trying to work that out and, trying to work ahead there, and then you get extra finances, so sometimes you have to figure out ways to bring in extra money. So what happens is that, you can really, if you're not careful about this, you can grow distant with each other, and the kids leave home, go off to university, and you're strangers. And so you want to do things that will help you to be a couple again before that happens. Number 18. Refuse to nurse anger into grudges. And I'm telling you, this is the stuff that kills off marriages and kills off people. I kind of did this. I know this is kind of a gross illustration. It's not even that well drawn. God's gift is forgiveness. That's what he's given us, to people who hurt each other. You've probably heard, probably an urban myth, or something like that about somebody who brings a big python into their house and so on, and they pet it and feed it and everything like that, and then one day it strangles them to death. So you think it's a pet. And it's the same thing with grudges, with anger, and lists of wrongs and resentment. We don't think there's a big problem with them, but you nurse these things, and I'm telling you, they will kill you someday. They will choke you to death. It says that we give a foothold to Satan when we let that stuff go on in our marriage. Number 19, be really, really careful about friends of the opposite sex. Now, this goes contrary to what many people think, because couples, they become best friends and so on. But I'm telling you, if you have a friend of the opposite sex, and you're at work with them, and you run into a problem in your marriage, what you're going to begin to do is you're going to think, well, she understands. She's a woman. I'll talk to her, And so you do that. And what happens is you're talking to them about things that you're not talking to your spouse about, which creates intimacy and creates a bond. And I'm telling you, I wish I could tell you how many couples I've talked to said, he slept with my best friend, that happens. And you just have to be really, really careful with it, because research, and this is not Christian research, this is just research period, that says this is dangerous to do in a marriage. And one more thing, number 20, and that is be totally accountable to each other. Let me define this. This means that your spouse should be able to look on your computer at anything that you're at, that they have the passwords and they can go into it, that your spouse has access to your phone and that they can go and look at what's on your phone. Because you both need to learn to trust each other, and you have to do this. The passage from the book of Revelation, I was reading it the other day, and it was some instructions to the church at Ephesus. And this is what it says: "You have forsaken the love you had at first. Consider how far you've fallen. Repent." And then these words, "Do the things that you did at first." Do the things that you did at first. And I'm telling you, love can be rekindled. Love can be rekindled, but you have to do the things that you did at first. There's an old song, probably written and sung before you were born, by Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond, and they sang, you don't send me flowers anymore. And there's this whole thing. It's just, oh man, breaks your heart. You don't sing me love songs anymore. You don't say you need me. You don't say you love me. You don't send me flowers. The passage says, why don't you try doing the things that you did at first? Because remember, feelings follow action. And a lot of times what happens is people just do nothing. Let me just challenge you on this a little bit, okay? If your car started blowing smoke and making all kinds of noise and stuff like this at a traffic light, you probably wouldn't just keep on driving and tell it to just settle down and stop it, right? You take it in, get it fixed. I tell you, counselors are worth every penny that you would ever pay them. Like, send up the trouble flares. Get some help. Because God will help, and other people can help you to see one another's perspective and work through some really difficult stuff. And that's what I would urge you to do. If you're in trouble, if you're in a difficult time, and COVID has caused all kinds of stuff with people being together too much and fear and anger and all the stuff that goes along, get help. Get help. And especially ask God for his help, and he'll help you. Let's pray. God, I know that this is a sensitive subject. All of us can look at places, if we're married, we can look at places where we failed and places where we just weren't loving, we weren't responsive, we weren't affectionate, we weren't kind, we weren't lots of things because we're humans. Help us to not excuse it, but to keep the promises that we've made. Give us power to do that. In Jesus' name, amen. Homework for this week is simply this. If you need help, get help. If you need help, get help. We're going to worship, and then when we come back, I want to send you out.
Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
So may the God who thought up the original idea of marriage, of two man and a woman coming together, of how they would be very different and yet in a unique way meet each other's needs. May the one who came up with the whole idea of love, may the one who showed us such incredible love by giving himself on our behalf, teach us how to love and teach us how to keep our promises. Amen.